Hello everyone, and let's get back to these lectures. I already did, I believe it was like 4 years ago, wing attack against first move g3. Well, in the meantime, Magnus Carlsen played 6 games with h5. So now it's way better for black because I just have to tell you and proudly to reveal you that in 6 of those games, he played 3 games according to the analysis from the video. No, I'm not telling you that he was watching the videos. Maybe he did, but actually he was just using the top engine analysis, probably even there. That's how deep and strong he is, showing you that he even makes analysis on g3, h5. Anyways, let's begin with g3, h5. This is extremely useful against those who would like to play solid systems. They don't want to play, they want to go and play some e4, d4 Catalan systems, but sometimes even English with c4. Well, that's not going to be the case, so we just go with h5 to immediately shake the things up and show our intentions. So let's go. There are following moves. Moves are h4, c4, h3, bishop g2, and the main move, knight f3. In all these games, we're going to be following games of Magnus Carlsen, few more by top players that happen, and in 2 lines, you're going to follow my games as well. So let's go. First is h4. I don't think h4 can be taken as anything that's special for white. I know you're now laughing and this looks like what is this guy showing to us, because okay, it definitely stops h4 by black, but then what? Well, then you want to be original, you want to play chess like Anthony Miles, then you should be going with knight h6 and say, I want to go with this, and my next move will be after bishop g2, e5. You want to go with bishop c5, knight g4, knight c6, queen f6, and have a nice game. Then a famous game between Anthony Miles and Nick de Fermian, ex-United States champion. This game happened in San Francisco in 1990, and Nick de Fermian played knight a6. Believe it or not, yes, he went for knight a6. Well, such an original game by both of these guys. And after knight h3, he played b5, and after knight f4, played rook b8. Sorry for laughing, but this looks to me more like Fischer chess, 960. Let's call it freestyle as well. And just like you see, black has a relatively original concept here, but somehow I still have to admit that I like his opening. In the game was knight a3. You know that Anthony Miles was always very resourceful as well, and after b3, knight h6, bishop b2, at this moment they continue to play, and eventually they made a draw. And finally, if you ask me seriously speaking, what should you go for? I like that knight h6 idea, but probably I like the most e5. e5 is a nice move. You just want to develop your knight to c6, bishop c5, and I'm going to put you back on the Serbian system against English opening, where I always insist whenever they go for c4, you might be going into that line. Simply, if they ever play c4, you go knight c6, bishop c5, and you go with a game like this. All things considered, this is a very nice position, and somehow I like our chances here. After like e5, bishop g2, bishop c5, e3, knight c6, e3 makes sense. e3 makes sense because it closes the activity of this bishop, knight c6 to prevent d4, knight e2 to go d4, d5, d4, and then play bishop b6. I like it a lot. I played a blitz game like this. I easily won. D takes, knight takes, queen d5, and I played queen e7. You know what? My opponent went to grab this pawn on d5. Then I just played knight f6, bishop g4, and I mated him very attractively, but I don't want to show you this game because simply I don't think you're going to face h4 that often. c4. c4, I won't go in details because I'm just going to give you the following thing. Elyanov played against Baria Zuniga in an online blitz championship h4. In this case, I'm suggesting you to go into the Serbian system against English opening. You can find that video. It's a very attacking and very aggressive system that has one of the high scoring rate against the English opening with black pieces. Find it here. You keep asking me about that system. You keep purchasing the PGNs about it, and it's for a reason, because it really gives black an amazing activity and a very aggressive game. Anyways, when you play e4, if they ever go with a knight c3, knight c6, bishop g2, you just go with bishop c5. You'll hide your bishop on a7 and support the h4 pushing afterwards. By the way, if they don't play like this, but they play knight f3, let me show you another interesting game in this one. And after, like, you go with e4, knight h4. Now you're probably wondering who was black. At one point, second player of the world, extremely aggressive, original, talented, and always creative when it comes to openings. Morozevich was black. He went with bishop e7, knight f5, of course, and played d5. I like this gambiting stuff. Simply, you can take on g7 because king f8 would trap that knight. So you gotta take on e7, queen takes e7, and somehow I already see after h4 lots of activity in black's game. He threatens to take on g3 and go after the rook. After knight c3, knight f6, d3, he just went for e3. Another lovely move, because after Grandmaster Nikita Petrov went for bishop e3, after Morozevich captured, he couldn't capture with any of these pawns, and he was already in a trouble. This is a lovely idea with sacking your pawn on e3 with a pawn on h4, where they never can capture it by bishop because of h takes g3. Eventually, of course, Morozevich won the game. It happened in Moscow 2019. So we've seen already two moves, and now it's time to see h3. Here I found one correspondence game. h3 is usually a very common way of treating these h5 ideas, not only here, but in all kinds of g3 openings. Whenever black plays h5, you have almost 50% of the guys who will on autopilot go with h3 so they can face any h4 with g4. Well, in this case, what do you want? You just go with d5. That's one suggestion, and then I'll show you one correspondence game. I like d5. That's how I played all my blitz and bullet games. I played bishop f5, and just when you play bishop g2, no, I won't play queen d7, not allowing you to make castle, even though I can play that, because creating a battery and not allowing castle could be one of your priorities in these positions. I believe that knight f6 is more interesting, with original concept of bringing your knight to e4, then going with the queen on d7, because now h3 is going to be weaker because the king has to defend it. With a pawn on h4, you can play f6 and support a g5, g4, g5, or h4 ideas, whatever. And you just have a very lovely game. Queen d7 attacking the pawn on h3, king h2, long castles, followed by f6 and g5. Very interesting line. Very interesting concept. I used it a couple of times rather than h4. h4 was used. I also played it in a couple of blitz and bullet games. After e5 classic, I want to go knight c6, bishop c5, but then I just realized that I can trade this like a grab opening. When they play g4, you go d5 closing the light square bishop, and after this, f5. This is a nice way of breaking these pawns on the king's side. g5, bishop d6, knight c3, c6, and now by building up a pawn center like this, knight e7, d4 taking there, c5 and knight c6, black very convincingly won this correspondence game. So what's my job? To show you different kinds of plans, absolutely, like various type of ideas against these g3, h3, g3, h4, and other systems, and you will decide, depending on your preferences and your style, what to do and how to treat these positions. And now we've seen h4, we've seen h3, c4, which is more like English opening, so it's time for two more variations. Let's go with the two main moves, bishop g2 and knight f3. Those who play bishop g2, I believe they just go under our attack, and we should be going with h4. It's nothing that special. For example, when I played all those bullet games, lots of guys play g3, bishop g2, knight f3, almost on, just like I previously told you, autopilot. And when that happens, and that happens actually very often to me, but before I go to knight f3, I just want to show you. If c4, it's e5, very similar to a Serbian attack against the English opening. Then you have d4, where you play d5, and somehow you always keep controlling and kind of locking the slide square bishop with opponent d5. I want to play c6 afterwards. For example, there was a game between one of the best Serbian players, Ivanišević, against Fedosev. c6 played Fedosev, locking somehow his knight and the bishop. Of course, here you gotta play e4, but somehow with this pawn on h4, I always prefer, I can't say I prefer, but I don't dislike black's chances. He went for queen c8, defending knight g on f6, and just like you see, he absolutely had, like a lovely position. I would say comfortable one. And finally, those who in this position take, then you go with e5, and then you want to capture by queen, and you want to add your piece into the attack. So this is another interesting thing. I played lots of games with knight f3 where they tried to do something like this. I don't care. I don't want to take on h4 and to lose on e4. I'll defend my pawn on e4, threatening to take on h4. And when they play like this, f6, capturing with tempo, simply they have terrible development. Knight e7, rook e4, knight c6, and a very lovely game. That's what happened in one of my blitz games. And finally, knight f3. Knight f3, believe it or not, was the most common answer by most of my opponents here. Somehow, they just want to send a message, okay, push your pawn to h3. It's not a big deal, but it actually is a big deal. Because when we push our pawn to h3, somehow we're squeezing out this bishop. When the bishop goes back to f1, you play d5. And I always played like this, but I just have to be honest with you and to tell you that sometimes I was just fooling around because I didn't have like a clear plan. So once I would play knight c6, another time I would play knight f6, third time I would play bishop g4, fourth time bishop f5, and then one day I just decided to take a look at something and find some approaches. Also, to be honest with you, I was analyzing this a little bit with an engine because I'm happy and feel kind of entertained when I analyze some weird positions with engines, because I just want to get some ideas for my students who I prepare afterwards. And after d4, one idea that I used massively in my blitz games was knight c6, bishop g4, queen d7, and long castle. I call this plan primitive plan of trading this opening, and you know what? Even the name is kind of a brutal here. And even though I called it primitive, it's a very nice one. They are just weak along, like on the light squares, and it's a fairly interesting one. When he has the engine, what to do against d4? Engine says play knight f6, and after c4, play like queen's gambit accepted with the pawn on h3. If you ask me, with the pawn on h3, this queen's gambit accepted is very nice. Now, in order and to be able to play these positions, you just have to imagine when in queen's gambit accepted, we allow our opponent to play h5, h4, h3. And is it good at all for black? It's certainly a little bit better for black than for white. So if they go e3 to get it back, now, unlike all those positions when we play bishop g4 in queen's gambit accepted, where white just kicks it away and drives the bishop, back with h3. Here, that's not a case because they don't have h3. So they permanently have problems with knight on c6, queen on d7, and I simply want to play queen d7 long castle and break with e5, even attacking the d4 pawn. Then there are those who in this position would play knight c3. They want to build up a strong pawn center. Not a big problem. I'm just going to play a6 and I'm just going to try to defend my pawn. It's a very difficult thing because once again it pays off that we have this pawn on h3, that they won't be able to push h3 themselves and kick our bishop away. So I want to play with bishop g4 or bishop b7, and in both of these cases they will have problems with the pawn on e4. Very interesting system, and that pawn on h3 turns out to be in our favor in most of these cases. And finally, let me just show you one more interesting game, bishop f5, e3. Those who try to play like some mix or some sort of London system, it doesn't work here. It doesn't work here because you just play e6 and f6. That's a legendary Nimzowitsch plan from one of his games and from his book My System in Practice. The bishop on f4, if it's surrounded by its own pawns, you should just kick it away with these pawns and play f6 followed by g5, and bishop on f4 turns out to be a little bit weak. And finally, if they go with e3, e6, bishop d3, always let them take. Play knight c6. What's the point? Somehow you have a very nice control of all these light squares, and that's a very good thing about you. After castles, queen f6, now you want to play bishop g4 followed by g5. After queen e2, of course, is lost because of e5, and they're just losing the piece. Bishop f5, queen f5. You know what? The fact that we moved the light square bishop means that they now weaken themselves on the light squares. So after knight bd2, knight f6, g5 to kick that knight away, long castle to put a king in safety and play the opposite side castles type of the game, g4, bishop b4, taking on c4, and playing knight to e4 followed by knight g5. I enjoy in this position a lot for black. Of course, knight e5 was also a possibility, and after rook g8 to prevent any f3 because you take and afterwards sack your piece on g3. That's a very lovely thing. In the game was this: knight f3, rook takes g3, this one, rook g8, took, and after rook g2, this guy resigned. Just like you see a very lovely attacking game by black here, and the way to simply treat these games this way. So this is what I'm suggesting you to do in this type of game, and that's what I can give as a really, really, really special one. So just like you see a very lovely type of the game by black, who else but Magnus, and all these ideas came to me when you watch his games. All these ideas seem very naturally and not so difficult to find, but try to play them over the board and during the game. It's not gonna be not easy at all. It's gonna be incredible in most of cases. And finally, g3, h5, and knight to f3. Here I once again have to go on Magnus Carlsen's games. He played it a couple of times like this. He beat Shimonov, he beat other GMs as well. Usually we can now disconnect to my words. No matter what he plays, he's gonna beat you up. That's how how strong he is. And after knight f3, h4 happened in all those games. If you remember my old video, after knight h4, in the old video I told you to play rook h4 and to sack and to look for some compensation. Here we're going to be looking and analyzing games of Magnus Carlsen and see how does it work in his case. He always played e5, which I like a lot more. Okay, I had this in my video, if you remember, and I said now you could try to sack on h4, and I pretty much paid attention on sacking an exchange like this really a lot. And in the previous video I told you if they go with d4, that could be pretty messy, play like that, and that's a nice thing. But the thing about this one is what happens first if they move the knight. Here we're going to show you the game of Tolongon tagging against Magnus Carlsen in FIDE Blitz Championship. So Magnus played 96, played d5, and what did he do? He just sacked a pawn for the open h-file and for the sake of attack along the h-file. I very much like this one because after bishop g2, he played this bishop h3. He's now taking advantage of not having pawn on the h-file, being able to somehow, let's say, kind of organize counterattack in case you ever decide to go with a short castle, or maybe he's just sending you a sign. Don't you dare to make a short castle because I'm just going to mate you along the h-file and on the king side. And this is kind of interesting. After c4, knight f6, he captured by queen. He likes this or in original type of games. This is not the first time I'm watching Magnus playing these word games. He always takes by queen, then pins with a bishop, takes the knight, and goes with a long castle. I like this one. And afterwards, he beat up Tologon tagging in a very lovely game. After queen b3, he jumped knight g4 to defend on e5, to defending on e5, tying the defense of white pieces for the h2 pawn, played rook h5, brought a knight back, now repositioned the knight, played rook e8, and this is what I'm telling you and what I keep repeating. No matter what you play against Magnus, you're gonna lose because he's just better player than all of us. So that's what happened in the game with the knight f3. Then somebody else, that's Shimanov, grandmaster, who's pretty strong, played not pretty strong, very strong, and online he has his own blitz systems. He played d3 against Magnus. Magnus now played according to my analysis a rook h4 that I gave you in the video here about the wing attack 4 years ago. And after queen h4, e3, I especially liked now his approach. He played d5, knight c6, and I can give you a very interesting move, queen h7. An idea would be to play f6 followed by bishop e6 and long castle. That would be my novelty here. On your question, why queen on h7? Because I want to control d3 and c2. Sometimes I want to play some bishop f5, or I want to break with e4 and so many other things. But in this case, when you go with the queen h5, this queen on h5 goes with the bishop g4 and attacks the knight. So after like bishop e2, Magnus played bishop g4. And after h3, knight f6, rook g1, he captured. After knight g5, he's forcing his opponent, because he's attacking on g4 and threatening on e2, to give up rook for 2 pieces. And it looks okay. Magnus here played queen g1 and won the game. It was titled Tuesday game. But after queen h4, both of these pieces would find themselves under the attack. So after knight f7, check this one. And just like you see, after such a messy opening, this just would be a roughly equal type of the game. Although if you ask me, once again, what should you play against d3? Yes, second exchange. Yes, take by queen. A threat to play bishop c5. Yes, go with d5, building up a strong center, supported by the knight. And here, I really like this idea of queen h7, because it's not only about giving you one move, but I actually have to tell you what are you supposed to do afterwards. And afterwards, my suggestion and my vote goes to f6, bishop e6, and long castle, which looks like a very tempting attacking plan for black. And finally, let's go for the main line. Even when I made this wing attack video 4 years ago, I said that absolutely the best would be counter-attacking black in the center by d4. Because d3, you are under the sack. Knight f3, you're just like the Alekhine in a good version for us with e4. But when they play d4, you're just opening up your pieces, breaking the center, and this looks by far, in my opinion, the best. Of course you take. And now, Henrique Villagra played a very interesting move here. He played and this is very interesting, in one of his games he played the top engine move c3. Magnus played d5, captured by pawn, Magnus sacrificed. Played queen h4, and after queen d3, played knight c6, threatening the pawn. And just when the guy thought, okay, I'm going to do a counter attack on d5, Magnus played knight b4. Actually, Magnus played knight f6 and won the game afterwards. Knight f6, bishop e3, knight b4, bishop f5, knight e4, and he had an amazing compensation and won the game. But after knight b4, believe it or not, he's winning. 9 moves, he's winning with wing attack with h5. Because wherever this queen moves, you just have some bishop f5 followed by knight c2 ideas. So it's not easy even if you follow the engine and prepare these lines. Once again, if you simply feel the systems, it's going to be easier for playing for you. Another thing is knight f3, then you play d4, knight d4, and then you play c5. You're down a pawn, yes, but you have a very lovely development. Once again, Henrique Villagra tried bishop g2, knight f6, bishop e7, Magnus played bishop e6. And this is Magnus' approach. He just kept on developing himself in a normal fashion. From another point of view, let's take a look at this one. He's not worse because he's down a pawn. He certainly has a decent compensation because of the open h-file. So this guy went for knight c3, Magnus played d4, took by pawn. I especially like these ideas. I know them from some d4, from some e4 openings. You take by pawn, then you kick it away, and then you launch the attack with f4. Just because Magnus was black, I'll show you the game. He captured on g3, played queen b6, played long castle, now all in, played king b8, putting the king in safety, captured by knight, played queen c7, threatening queen g3, took by rook, took on g3, and sent this guy to the history of this opening. So just like you see, a very lovely game by Magnus. And finally, Grigory Oparin, strong player, the guy who occasionally, who's I believe one of the seconds of Caruana, was white against Magnus in another blitz game. Oparin took on d4, another one of the top engine choices. Magnus played knight c6 with tempo. What is this? This is Scandinavian reversed, where you're down a pawn and where you have the open h-file, and they have a stranded knight on h4. So if queen a4, I was trying to find something interesting. One guy played rook h5, but it wouldn't be my approach. Treat this like Scandinavian reversed with an open h-file, with a possibility to take advantage of the h-file, but at the same time, treat it like that famous Leonhard gambit with b5. And simply, when they take rook b8, you play knight e5, you go all over the board, and believe me, this is everything but probably the least similarity it has with chess itself. It's more like freestyle chess, where I really, really enjoy black's compensation. And finally, if queen e3, you just go with bishop e7, everything looks cool. You just have to remember, if you follow this lecture very carefully, you would know that after knight f5, he just threatens on e7 and g7. Magnus played d5, attacking the knight. You can't take because the knight would be trapped, and that was already an idea previously. So after knight e7, knight g7, Magnus developed peace. And after knight a3, queen d7, long castles, just like you see, he kept on chasing this queen away and won the game. I hope that you enjoyed today's lecture. I was trying to present you these things more through the games and plans. Didn't want to take so much time. Didn't want to go too slowly, because none of these moves, whether you play it with white or black, are forced, but it's way more important to understand the ideas and concepts and what to do. Next lecture is also going to be interesting. I'm going to just give you another hint. It's going to be another wing attack, but you'll see which one. Have a good one and all the best.